Yo, what's up, everybody? Professor V here, and this is the lecture for Abnormal Psychology, Chapter 11, Schizophrenia Spectrum Disorders. Let's go. Schizophrenia is a chronic, debilitating disorder that touches every facet of the affected person's life. Nearly 1 million people in the United States are treated for schizophrenia each year, with about a third of them requiring hospitalization. Schizophrenia affects a person's outward behavior, covert thoughts, emotions, and perceptions of the environment and reality itself. It is not only the most disabling psychological disorder, but also the most puzzling psychological disorder, as simple biological or psychological reasoning for the behavior cannot alone account for the disorder. Schizophrenia typically develops in late adolescence or early adulthood, so many of my own students are in this range. Don't be frightened. This doesn't mean you will develop schizophrenia, you're just the most prone to it right now than you will ever be in your lifetime. Only 1% of the population actually develops schizophrenia, and thus it's quite a rare psychological disorder. The diagnosis for schizophrenia requires that active phase symptoms such as hallucinations, delusions, and disorganized or catatonic behavior must be present a significant amount of the time for at least 1 month.
It was a hot night in August 1976, the summer of my 17th year, when uninvited and unannounced, the voices took over my life. I was going into my senior year in high school, so this was to be my last year at summer camp. College, job, adulthood, responsibility, they were all just around the corner. But for the moment, I wasn't prepared for anything more than a summer of fun. I certainly wasn't prepared to have my life change forever. You must die. Other voices joined in. You must die. You will die. At first, I didn't realize where I was. Was I at the lake? Was I asleep? Was I awake? Then I snapped back to the present. I was here at camp alone. My summertime fling was long gone, 2 years gone. That long ago scene was being played out in my mind, and in my mind alone. But as soon as I realized that I was in my bunk and awake, and that my roommate was still sleeping peacefully, I knew I had to run. I had to get away from these terrible, evil voices. Since that time, I have never been completely free of those voices. At the beginning of that summer, I felt well. A happy, healthy girl, I thought, with a normal head and heart. By summer's end, I was sick, without any clear idea of what was happening to me or why. And as the voices evolved into a full-scale illness, one that I only later learned was called schizophrenia, it snatched from me my tranquility, sometimes my self-possession, and very nearly my life. Along the way, I've lost many things. The career I might have pursued, the husband I might have married, the children I might have had during the years when my friends were marrying, having their babies, and moving into the houses I once dreamed of living in. I have been behind locked doors, battling the voices who took over my life without even asking my permission.
Schizophrenia is perhaps the most puzzling and disabling psychological disorder. It is the condition that best corresponds to popular conceptions of madness or lunacy. Although researchers are probing the psychological and biological foundations of schizophrenia, the disorder remains largely a mystery.
Again, schizophrenia age of onset is likely in late adolescence or early adulthood, when young people are beginning to make their way into the world. There's a lot of questions that need answering, and this results in high amounts of stress. Some of these decisions may result in higher stress, and some as well. In some cases, the onset of schizophrenia is acute, meaning symptoms develop suddenly within a few weeks or months. Someone experiencing an acute onset of schizophrenic symptoms typically has symptoms that occur suddenly, often within a few weeks or months, and who appears to have been well adjusted and show few signs of behavioral disturbances before onset. The symptoms experienced are the more serious symptoms of schizophrenia that include delusions and hallucinations. However, in most cases, schizophrenia develops in a slow, gradual fashion, starting in late adolescence. The phase of schizophrenia marked by a slow, steady deterioration and gradual decline in function before clear-cut psychotic behaviors emerge is called the prodromal phase of schizophrenia. As you read above, it is characterized by symptoms that drastically affect daily functioning, such as ability to plan and organize one's activities, cognitive processes including memory and attention, and interactions with others, such as decreased language abilities. Because of the rate of chronic onset, the changes of a person with chronic onset may be overlooked as going through a stage or a phase when behavior becomes more bizarre, such as hoarding food, collecting garbage, or talking to oneself on the street. The acute phase of onset begins. In the acute stage, again, psychotic symptoms develop, including delusions, hallucinations, and social withdrawal. Following acute episodes, some may enter the residual phase of schizophrenia. During the residual phase, the person with schizophrenia's behavior will return to a level where flagrant psychotic symptoms are not present, such as hallucinations and delusions, but significant cognitive, social, and emotional deficits are still apparent. And because there is still significant symptoms of schizophrenia present, it is difficult for people who suffer from schizophrenia to function normally in their social or occupational roles, at least without treatment. About 2/3 of patients with schizophrenia improve significantly over time with treatment. However, a full return to normal is uncommon. Often patients suffer from occasional acute episodes and continued cognitive, emotional, and motivational impairment between psychotic episodes. Again, schizophrenia affects about 1% of the entire world's population. That does not seem like a lot of people. However, 1% of 7 billion, which is the world's population, is 70 million people. In the United States alone, that is 2 million people. Nearly 1 million per year are treated for schizophrenia in the United States, with 1/3 requiring hospitalization. When it comes to gender differences, men have a higher risk to developing schizophrenia than do women, and they tend to develop it more earlier on in life than women. Men also experience greater cognitive impairments and have more behavioral deficits than women. Men do not respond to drug therapy as well as women do either. Women tend to develop schizophrenia later in life and have a less severe course of the disorder than do men. All of the symptoms of schizophrenia are classified as either positive or negative symptoms. The terms positive and negative does not refer to the fact that the symptoms are good or bad to have. It refers to excesses of behavioral traits or behavioral deficits. Positive symptoms are among the more prominent features of schizophrenia. Disorders in the content of thought or delusions, form of thought, as well as the presence of perceptual distortions or hallucinations. A break from reality is also a positive symptom. Negative symptoms are behavioral deficits or an absence of typical normal behavior. These can include lack of emotional responses or expressions such as maintaining a blank expression, loss of motivation, loss of pleasure in activities that normally the person finds pleasure in, lack of social relationships, withdrawal or isolation, and limited output of speech. When in the residual state of schizophrenia, positive symptoms tend to reside. However, negative symptoms of schizophrenia may still persist. Also, negative symptoms are more resistant to antipsychotic drugs. Other features of schizophrenia include confusion about personal identity, lack of volition, excitable behavior or states of stupor, odd gestures or bizarre facial expressions, impaired ability to relate to others, or possible catatonic behavior or gross disturbance in motor activity and orientation in which a person's behavior may slow to a stupor, but then abruptly shift to a highly agitated state. To further discuss one of the positive symptoms, false beliefs that remain fixed in a person's mind despite illogical basis and lack of evidence are delusions. There are several different types of delusions that can occur and are not limited to just one type in a person who suffers from schizophrenia. The delusion of persecution is often portrayed in movies and stories as someone who thinks that they are being chased by police constantly. This is actually very true to delusions of persecution. Someone who suffers from the delusion of persecution truly believes they are being chased or tracked by the police, the FBI, the CIA, or any other organization or person despite any contradictory evidence such as not having a criminal record at all. So, Rico believes that people are spying on him. He claims that the CIA has put a microphone in his dog's stomach so that they can listen to his private conversations. Rico beliefs represent delusions of persecution. Delusions of reference believe that people are always talking about them or that people on television are referring to them. This could make them believe that people around them or on television are planning against them or making fun of them. So if Rico believes that people on the street talk about him when he walks by, he also believes that the people on the bus are talking about him when he rides the bus to work. At work, he believes his coworkers standing at the water cooler are talking about him. Rico's beliefs represent delusions of reference. Delusions of being controlled is believing that one's thoughts, feelings, impulses, or actions are controlled by external forces, such as agents of the devil. If Rico believes that his actions are being manipulated by evil demons who are trying to possess his body, truly believes that when he shot those 14 innocent people at his office, it was because of the demons talking to him through his neighbor's cat made him do it, would be suffering from delusions of being controlled. Delusions of grandeur is believing oneself to be Jesus, or believing that one is on a special mission, or having illogical plans of saving the world. So Rico believes he's Jesus Christ. He is convinced he has returned to pass judgment on the world and offer salvation to true Christians. Despite complete lack of evidence to support his belief, he remains convinced that he is Christ and that he is all powerful. Rico's beliefs represent delusions of grandeur. A few other commonly occurring delusions include thought broadcasting, in which a person believes their own thoughts are somehow transmitted to the external world so that others can overhear them. Thought insertion, where believing one's thoughts have been planted in one's mind by an external source. And thought withdrawal, believing that thoughts have been removed from one's mind. A couple more delusions are the beliefs that one has committed unpardonable sins. One is rotting away from a horrible disease, that the world or oneself does not really exist, or the belief that one desperately needs to help people. People with schizophrenia tend to think in a disorganized, illogical fashion. In schizophrenia, the form of structure of thought processes, as well as their content, is often disturbed. The breakdown in the organization, processing, and control of thought common in schizophrenia is called thought disorder. When compared to people who do not suffer from thought disorder, the connections or associations between our thoughts tend to be logical and coherent. Even when we daydream or our mind wanders, we have the ability to shift our thought processes back quickly. Those with thought disorder cannot. Looseness of associations is the main sign of thought disorder. Speech patterns are often jumbled, not make any sense, or jump from one topic to the next. The thing is, those with thought disorder believe it to be normal, no matter the evidence against it. No matter how many times or how many people tell them that they are not making any sense. Other signs of thought disorders is poverty of speech, which is speech that is coherent but slow, limited in quantity, or vague, that little information is conveyed. Neologisms, which are made-up words that have little to no meaning to others. So if Shelley is constantly making up new words that have little or no meaning to her listeners, she would be engaging in neologisms. Preservation are inappropriate but persistent repetition of the same words or train of thoughts. And clanging. This is stringing together of words or sounds on the basis of rhyming, such as I know who I am, but I don't know Sam. So, while talking to others, Shelley will string words together on the basis of rhyming without regard to the meaning of the words. As a result, meaning of her clever little poems lack any comprehensible meaning to her listeners. When Shelley does this, she is engaging in clanging. In order for you to pay attention to the lecture, you have to tune out all other noises around you and focus your attention on the video and audio. People with schizophrenia are unable or have difficulty filtering out irrelevant stimuli, making it nearly impossible for them to focus their attention, organize their thoughts, and filter out unessential information. Hypervigilance is being acutely sensitive to extraneous sounds, especially during the early stages of the disorder. During an acute episode, they may become flooded by stimuli, overwhelming their ability to make sense of their environments. People with schizophrenia are noted to have an eye movement, where the eyes do not steadily track a target, but instead fall back and then catch up in a kind of jerky movement. Eye movement dysfunctions appear to involve deficits in the brain's control of visual attention. Overall, they have a greater difficulty filtering out distracting stimuli, leading to a sensory overload and a jumbling of sensations. The most common perceptual disturbances in schizophrenia are hallucinations, which are sensory perceptions experienced in the absence of external stimulation. They are difficult to extinguish from reality. In matter of fact, just like delusions, despite contradictory evidence, someone who is hallucinating believes a hallucination to be reality. They occur in acute stages of schizophrenia and can occur in any of the five senses. Many people are familiar with the idea of hearing things or auditory hallucinations. However, a person may have olfactory hallucinations, gustatory hallucinations, tactile hallucinations, or also visual hallucinations. The most common type of hallucinations are auditory, and the least common are visual hallucinations, or seeing things that are not actually there. Tactile hallucinations such as tingling, electrical, or burning sensations, or somatic hallucinations such as feeling snakes are crawling inside one's body are also common. Olfactory hallucinations, sensing odors that are not present, and gustatory hallucinations, tasting things that are not present, are not as common. The neurotransmitter dopamine is implicated largely because of antipsychotic drugs that block dopamine activity also reduce hallucinations. Conversely, drugs that lead to increased production of dopamine, such as cocaine, can induce hallucinations. Because hallucinations resemble dreamlike states, they may be connected to a failure of brain mechanisms that normally prevent dream images from intruding on waking experiences. Cognitive behavioral therapy has become a useful addition to drug therapy in helping control hallucinations and delusional thinking of patients with schizophrenia. However, even if theories linking inner speech to auditory hallucinations stand up to further scientific inquiry, they cannot account for hallucinations in other sensory modalities such as visual, tactile, or olfactory hallucinations.
Can you tell me what are some of the symptoms of paranoid schizophrenia that you are suffering from?
Occasionally I hear voices in my head.
Okay. What kind of voices are they? Can you tell me about the voices?
I have all kinds of companions, some fictional and some non-fictional.
Some fixed and...
I have all kinds of voices,
Mm-hmm.
some fictional and some non-fictional.
Can you tell me a little bit about them?
Well, I talk occasionally. I occasionally talk to myself and say. Well, actually, when I was very young, I devised. I was absolutely in love with baseball.
Mm-hmm.
I used to draw up charts of fictionalized baseball players. That's how much I was in love with baseball.
Mm.
And these were not real players. These were names which I invented. And I would give each player an individual name.
Mm.
That in fact was a very early symptom of my disease.
Mm.
That was when I was very, very young at summer camp, or Camp Kirkland,
Mm-hmm.
where it first began to manifest itself.
How old were you?
Well, I had my first initial difficulties in 7th grade when I was enrolled at Belmont Hill School in Lexington.
Mm-hmm. What were some of the beginning difficulties?
Well, I said before I had friends, some fictional, some non-fictional.
Were these friends friends that you could see, or friends that you could only hear?
Well, I didn't see them so much as I could hear them.
Mm-hmm. Could other people hear them?
Could other people hear them? I doubt it.
Okay. When you started hearing the voices, was that something that upset you or was scary to you?
It actually went unnoticed for many years. I was able to function, but in the academic community for many years. When I was in my senior year of high school, it manifested itself in a large way. Well, at first, I spent a few weeks at Westwood Lodge, and I had been diagnosed that time as being tired, possibly suffering a nervous breakdown from all the work I had done the previous year in high school. And they hospitalized me in Westwood Lodge in the very beginning with an initial diagnosis of nervous breakdown. But then when I moved on to Tufts, it blossomed into a real problem. However, I was able to complete my senior year of high school.
Oh.
And I did spend 2 years at college. 2 very rough years at college.
That time that you were in the hospital, the first time, your senior year, did you tell anyone about the voices?
They at that time, like I said, the original diagnosis was a nervous breakdown.
Okay. So when the voices talk to you, you said that you have fictional and non-fictional voices that talk to you?
I had friends.
Oh.
Okay, I had friends.
Okay. Can you describe the difference between the two? The two groups, the fictional friends versus the non-fictional friends?
Yeah, I loved history, and I loved talking about history, particularly. In fact, although I was enrolled as a political science major in college, I had difficulties. Like I said before, I had friends, some from history and some from names I had invented, people I had invented.
Disturbed emotional response in schizophrenia may involve negative symptoms such as loss of normal emotional expression, labeled as blunted affect or flat affect. Their emotional responses are typified by either inappropriate or blunted affect. What does that mean? I'll show you. Normal person, blunted affect. Flat affect refers to showing no emotional expressions in the face or voice, even in times of great joy and high levels of depression. Mask refers to just a lack of expression of facial emotions. Other times they may also display positive symptoms which involve exaggerated or inappropriate affect. For example, they may laugh for no reason or giggle at bad news. However, it is unclear that the emotional blunting occurs because of the person's inability to express emotions, report the presence of emotions in oneself or others, or experience emotions. Other types of impairments include being confused with personal identity. They may fail to recognize themselves as being a unique individual. They may have confusion about how much of what they experience is parts of themselves. This is referred to as loss of ego boundaries. Most often seen in the residual or chronic state of disturbances of volition, characterized by loss of initiative to pursue goal-directed activities. It is often characterized by apathy and loss of motivation. There is also a significant impairment in interpersonal relationships. Evidence from fMRI scans show deficits in the brain mechanisms in patients with schizophrenia affecting their ability to convert desires and goals into actions, which may help explain difficulties they have in completing basic life tasks like finding work, making friends, and pursuing an education. Another symptom exhibited by some patients with schizophrenia is catatonia, which involves severely impaired cognitive and motor functioning. People with schizophrenia who show unusual mannerisms or grimacing or maintain bizarre, strenuous postures for hours are exhibiting catatonia. They can also have highly excited behavior randomly with no purpose and then slowly enter a state of stupor. They can also stay in a position for hours at a time in which someone else puts them in or arrange them in. This is waxy flexibility. The entire time they are unresponsive but often report being conscious of their environments around them during a state of catatonia. They report being able to know what was said during or to them during this time. So, if Rico's behavior is characterized by markedly impaired motor activity that slows to a stupor but then switches abruptly into an agitated phase, he sometimes freezes in bizarre, uncomfortable looking postures which he maintains for hours, even as his limbs become stiff and swollen. He acts mute during these periods and displays waxy flexibility. He is best described as displaying catatonic behaviors. When it comes to the causal links to schizophrenia, genetics play a role in the development of schizophrenia. The closer the relationship to someone who suffers from schizophrenia, the greater the likelihood the other family member will also suffer from schizophrenia. This is not a guarantee. It is just a statistical finding that one has a higher chance. First-degree relatives of people with schizophrenia have about a tenfold greater risk of developing schizophrenia than do members of the general population. It becomes less as a relationship becomes further. Concordance rates among monozygotic or identical twins are 48% and is more than twice the rate among dizygotic or non-identical twins, which is 17%. This means that if one identical twin suffers from schizophrenia, the other twin has a 48% chance to develop schizophrenia as well. Remember, even though identical twins share the same genetic code, they have different experiences. This shows that there is an environmental factor to developing schizophrenia. Adoption studies of schizophrenia have found that schizophrenia occurs more frequently among children of schizophrenic biological parents than among children of normal biological parents when they are raised by normal adoptive parents. Scientists believe that multiple genes are indicated or implicated in the causation of schizophrenia. There is also evidence that points to irregularities in the use of dopamine in complex networks of neurons in the brain. The dopamine hypothesis points that schizophrenia involves overactivity of dopamine transmission in the brain. The support for this is that antipsychotic drugs, or neuroleptics, inhibit psychotic features or psychotic symptoms by reducing dopamine activity, and that amphetamines, which increase concentration of dopamine, cause symptoms that mimic paranoid schizophrenia.
Schizophrenia is a long-term psychological disorder involving a breakdown in the relation between thought, emotion, and behavior, leading to withdrawal from reality into fantasy and delusion. Positive symptoms, which are in excess of typical experiences, include hallucinations and delusions, hearing voices, seeing things that aren't there, and feelings of paranoia or believing that people are plotting against you. Clients may also experience delusions of grandeur, causing them to believe that they have superpowers and that they can fly or read others' minds. Negative symptoms are behaviors and responses that seem to be missing, such as a lack of emotional and verbal responses, weak social relationships, and decreased motivation. Cognitive impairments include difficulty with attention, learning, memory, and rational problem solving. The causes of schizophrenia most likely involve complicated interactions between genes, environments, and experiences. Investigations of the structure and activity in the brains of people with schizophrenia has led to the development of the hypofrontality model. Hypo meaning reduced, and frontality referring to the prefrontal cortex area of the brain. As the name implies, schizophrenia is associated with decreased neural activity in the prefrontal cortex. Along with decreased neural activity, evidence has been found for structural brain differences and differences in neurotransmitter systems, most notably dopamine, glutamate, and serotonin. Underactivity in the prefrontal cortex, especially in the dopamine pathway extending from the ventral tegmental area to the prefrontal cortex, may explain the negative and cognitive symptoms of schizophrenia. Dopamine activity in the nucleus accumbens, however, which is part of the mesolimbic dopamine system, is increased. The increase in dopamine activity in the mesolimbic pathway, which extends from the ventral tegmental area to the nucleus accumbens, may underlie the hallucinations and delusions that characterize the positive symptoms of schizophrenia. The long-standing dopamine hypothesis of schizophrenia holds that the positive symptoms of schizophrenia are caused by overactivity in dopamine synapses, particularly the dopamine D2 synapses. Evidence in support of the dopamine hypothesis stems from the activity of antipsychotic medications. Dopamine is released by presynaptic neurons and binds to postsynaptic dopamine receptors. Typical antipsychotic medications bind to postsynaptic dopamine receptors and prevent dopamine from binding to and activating the receptors. The end result is decreased dopamine activity and decreased positive symptoms of schizophrenia. Recent research indicates that dopamine may not be the only neurotransmitter whose activity is altered in schizophrenia. Activity in both glutamate and serotonin neurotransmitter pathways may be altered as well. Researchers have found that the increased dopamine activity in the mesolimbic system is accompanied by decreased activity in glutamate systems. Researchers have also found that medications that antagonize or block specific serotonin receptors also increase release of dopamine in the prefrontal cortex, which improves cognitive symptoms of schizophrenia. Information about altered neural activity in specific brain regions and neurotransmitter systems is currently guiding development of new medications for treating schizophrenia.
There is brain abnormalities in those that suffer from schizophrenia. There is a loss or thinning in gray matter in the brain. One of the clearest signs of this is the enlargement of the cerebral ventricles, hollow spaces in the brain. The larger the ventricles in the brain, the less responsive a person is to drug therapy for schizophrenia. There is also abnormal functioning in the prefrontal cortex of the brain. The prefrontal cortex is an area in the brain that is responsible for many higher order functions such as regulating and directing attention, organizing thoughts and behavior, prioritizing and formulating goals. And as you can recall, people who suffer from schizophrenia have trouble performing such tasks. There is also abnormalities in the limbic system, which is responsible for emotion regulation, perception, and control, as well as memory, all factors in which schizophrenia affects. The prevailing view today about the causes of schizophrenia is the diathesis-stress model. Environmental factors also play a role in schizophrenia, and many researchers have adopted the diathesis-stress model to account for the interaction between a genetic predisposition, a diathesis, and environmental factors. Basically, the diathesis-stress model states that it is a combination of a genetic predisposition and environmental factors that contribute to the developments of schizophrenia. However, if one factor is lacking, schizophrenia may not form. If someone has a genetic predisposition, the genetic coding may never become active, as seen in 52% of the people with identical twins that suffer from schizophrenia, but they do not. However, in the 48 cases of both twins that suffer from schizophrenia, this means that it may have been the environmental stressors that cause the genetic coding of schizophrenia to become active in both twins. Remember, monozygotic twins have different experiences, and if they both have a predisposition to schizophrenia and they both undergo amounts of stress that surpasses their threshold, they both may suffer from schizophrenia. However, if only one of the twins undergoes amounts of stress that surpasses their threshold, just that one twin may develop schizophrenia. It is possible that neither twin ever develops schizophrenia as well. Stressors can include, but are not limited to, family conflict, child abuse, emotional deprivation, loss of supportive figures, brain trauma, or injury. In the end, the underlying causes of schizophrenia remain elusive. They are presumed to involve both brain abnormalities in combination with psychological, social, and environmental influences. Antipsychotic medication is not a cure, but tends to stem the more flagrant aspects of the disorder and to reduce the need for hospitalization and the risk of recurrent episodes. They work by reducing dopamine levels and activity in the brain. They have demonstrated to be effective for many patients. Most people with schizophrenia in organized mental health settings are treated with antipsychotic medication. The first generation antipsychotics were associated with increased risk of tardive dyskinesia with long-term use, which causes involuntary movements of the face, mouth, neck, trunk, or extremities. Because of this, more research went into the development of more advanced antipsychotic medication. Atypical neuroleptics or atypical antipsychotics lowered the risk for tardive dyskinesia but still have their own side effects listed above. However, the negative effects from atypical neuroleptics were less than previous medications and more effective in treating both positive and negative symptoms of schizophrenia. Learning-based approaches such as token economy systems and social skills training have achieved some successes in increasing adaptive behavior among people with schizophrenia. 1. Selective reinforcement of behavior, such as providing attention for appropriate behavior and extinguishing bizarre verbalizations through withdrawal of attention. 2. Token economy, in which individuals and inpatient units are rewarded for appropriate behavior with tokens, such as plastic chips that can be exchanged for tangible reinforcers such as desirable goods or privileges. And 3, social skills training, in which clients are taught conversational skills and other appropriate social behaviors through coaching, modeling, behavioral rehearsal, and feedback. Psychosocial rehabilitation approaches help people with schizophrenia adapt more successfully to occupational and social roles in the community. Family intervention programs help families cope with the burden of care, communicate more clearly, and learn more helpful ways of relating to the patient. Investigations of family intervention programs for the treatments of schizophrenia have found that they reduce the risk of recurrent episodes of schizophrenia. These rehabilitation centers offer social support, educational opportunities, and employment opportunities. They can also offer housing and provide skills training. Being diagnosed with schizophrenia does not mean a person cannot have a productive life. They have to maintain their level of treatment just like a diabetic has to maintain their sugar levels and insulin levels. In your textbook, you read about John Nash on page 420. He is a famous mathematician who won the Nobel Peace Prize and had a movie about his life called The Beautiful Mind. He suffered from schizophrenia. You can also search on the internet for Ellen Sachs, a professor of law at the University of Southern California. She was diagnosed with schizophrenia at 16 years old, but thanks to medication and weekly therapy sessions, Ellen has been a successful professor of law for over 25 years. In addition to schizophrenia, the DSM-5 classifies psychological disorders within the schizophrenia spectrum. These disorders range from milder forms of disorganized or unusual thinking and difficulties relating to others to psychotic disorders. These disorders include brief psychotic disorder, schizophreniform disorder, delusional disorder, and schizoaffective disorder. A person carrying the diagnosis of brief psychotic disorder experiences psychosis that lasts from a day to 1 month. These episodes are often linked to significant stressors in the person's life. As you can read above, brief psychotic disorder is characterized by some of the same features of schizophrenia. The diagnosis of schizophreniform disorder is assigned to an individual who meets the basic criteria for a diagnosis of schizophrenia, but whose behavior does not yet justify the diagnosis of schizophrenia. If the features last longer than 6 months, then the diagnosis may be changed to schizophrenia. People with delusional disorder hold persistent, clearly delusional beliefs, often involving paranoid themes. The delusion itself is often the only clear sign of abnormality, whereas schizophrenic delusions are embedded within a more general pattern of disturbed thoughts, perceptions, and behaviors. Also, schizophrenia features may or may not be present. There are several types, including erotomania, which is the false belief that someone famous or of high social status is in love with you. Grandiose type is inflated beliefs about one's own worth, importance, power, knowledge, or identity, or beliefs that one has a special relationship to a deity or to a famous person. Cult leaders who believe that they have special mystical powers of enlightenment may have delusional disorders of this type. Jealousy type is the delusions of jealousy in which the person may become convinced, without due cause, of the infidelity of his or her partner. The delusional person may misinterpret certain clues as signs of unfaithfulness, such as spots on the bed sheets. Man, there are so many jokes I can make about this one, huh? Persecutory type is the most common type of delusional disorder. Persecutory delusions involve themes of being conspired against, followed, cheated, spied on, poisoned, or drugged, or otherwise mistreated. People with these delusions may repeatedly bring legal actions against those whom they perceive to be responsible for their mistreatment, or may even commit acts of violence against them. Somatic type is delusions involving the person's physical or medical condition. People with these delusions may believe that foul odors are emanating from their bodies or that internal parasites are eating away at them. And mixed types is delusions typify more than one of the other types with no single predominant theme. Persons with a diagnosis of schizoaffective disorder present with the psychotic features associated with schizophrenia, but also evidence of a major mood disorder. Either major depressive episodes or manic episodes occur. While schizophrenia affects only 1% of the world's population, schizoaffective is even less at 0.3% of the world's population and also has genetic links. Schizoaffective disorder also responds well to atypical neuroleptics and other antipsychotic medication. Overall, schizoaffective disorder is somewhat of a combination of schizophrenia and mood disorders. And this wraps up the lecture for Abnormal Psychology Chapter 11. Hope you enjoyed it, learned something new, didn't get paranoid about the next exam, and I will see you in the next video. Ciao. Is catatonia. The changes of a person with chronic onset aren't necessary, but they can also highly have there is brain abnormal blah 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 blah. However, if one's what causes involuntary movements of the face, mouth, what?